Today I'll be attempting to revive this Athearn Rio Grande Super F7. The first order of business is giving this F7 a good test run. I will set it up on the tracks just like so. I've got my controller turned on and I'll apply some power. I don't know if you can hear that, but we've got a headlight and it sounds like the motor is humming. I'll flip it in reverse and see if that changes anything. And it's the exact same case in reverse, so I would suspect this locomotive is seized. Funnily enough, the last Athearn Blue Box model I worked on had the exact same issue, so I've already got a pretty good idea of what might be going on inside of this locomotive. Before we dive into that though, let me give you a tour around this unit. This model actually appears to be in exceptionally good condition. I got it in a lot of other locomotives off of eBay a while ago, but going around the model, the paint on this side looks incredibly crisp. I don't really see any imperfections or anything. No scrapes, nothing. There's maybe a little bit of imperfection here, but that looks a little more factory than damage that was caused during the operation of this model. Up front, it also looks really nice. There may have been a little bit of touch-up paint here, but that also could have been factory. On the other side, this logo is fading just a little bit, but it's really not the worst I've ever seen. Something else of note too is that someone actually put windows in these portholes. On all these Athearn F7s I've ever seen, the windows just have been non-existent. They've been open voids, but there's actual plastic behind there, which is really cool to see. And if any of you were wondering how I can tell this is a Super F7, for one, it weighs quite a bit, and if you look in this porthole right here, you can't see anything. There is a silver weight in there that's blocking the view through there, and that's kind of how you can tell that this is a Super F7. Taking a look at the top of the model now, it also looks to be in very good shape. It's a little bit dusty, so I might take off the shell and give it a good wash and let it dry in the chilly California sun. The horns up here are a little bit loose. I found that this is an issue on a lot of older Athearn models, so when we go wash off the shell, I'll take these horns off, and then when it's time to reassemble everything, I'll reattach them with a little bit of canopy glue. And then going underneath the model, something that is kind of worth noting is that these trucks appear to be sitting weird. I would assume it's because of the metal bar inside the locomotive that is used to pick up power from the trucks, so I may end up replacing that with a wire, but it's no big deal. It just means the model isn't going to sit entirely right, and using some wires will just make it sit a little more level and reduce the risk of derailments. And in terms of the couplers, this is the last thing I want to touch on. On the back, we have this weird sort of drawbar connector thing. I want to remove that and replace it with a regular coupler, and up front, we don't have a coupler. I've got some of the generic Athearn Blue Box locomotive coupler boxes, so we can just kind of throw some horn hooks in there, and those should do the job for now. With that tour out of the way, let me get the shell off of this unit, and then we can take a look at what's going on inside of here. And to get the shell off, it's very simple. You just have one clip on each side of the model. You kind of pry it apart just like this. It sometimes takes just a little bit of effort, but now the shell is dislodged. It is worth noting that if you do have a coupler in the front, you have to be careful of that. You have to kind of wiggle around it or remove the entire coupler box to gain access in here. And now that the shell's out of the way, you can see the weight that makes this unit a Super F7. As far as I'm aware, the addition of weight is the only thing that makes this a Super F7 instead of a regular F7. If anyone does know of any other modifications they did to these, please do let me know, but it is kind of nice having an Athearn with some extra weight installed. Something else I'm noticing now that we have the shell off is just how shiny everything looks in here. This weight looks like it's almost brand new. Usually these Athearn components, these frames, these top bars even, and these weights are all very oxidized. There's a little bit of oxidation on here, but these still look incredibly shiny. It's probably the shiniest Athearn unit I have seen. The bar up here as well. Usually these are completely rusted out or very oxidized, but this one actually looks really nice. We only have a small spot of rust right there. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I'll probably be removing this since the trucks aren't sitting right. You can see when I have it like this, even if I flip the unit upside down, they're not sitting flush. So that needs to be fixed, and that means this really nice looking metal bar has to go. For the time being, I've taken the weight in the metal bar and moved them aside so we can focus on the locomotive, and the first thing I want to do is figure out what's seized up. I want to see if I can turn this motor over by hand and feel what amount of resistance it has, and then I'm going to remove one truck at a time to see if we can figure out if it's one specific truck that's having issues or if it's both of them. I'm suspecting our issue is that the worm gears are going to be locked up, but we will have to find out. So turning this over by hand, I am feeling a lot of resistance. You can see that the trucks are actually able to turn, but this is taking a lot of force, and there is no way that just with regular track power, this would have been able to turn over. So to figure out which truck is causing this, I'm going to remove one worm gear at a time. I will remove the one for the front truck first. I'll take the front truck out and see if removing all that makes this motor spin freely. And then if not, we will also remove the rear worm gear cover, worm gear and truck, and see if that is our issue. Those bearings feel very stiff. That's very likely the source of our issue. But I'll take the truck out, and the truck seems to spin freely. Now that that worm gear's out, I'm going to try spinning the motor over by hand once more. And it seems to spin a lot more freely, although I suspect that this worm gear is also bogging down the locomotive. Yeah, it is able to turn, but it is very stiff. So both of those were for sure bogging down the locomotive. And this truck definitely needs a good cleaning, but it also rolls much freer than that worm gear spins. And now that we've got all that out, let's see how the motor turns over. That's also not what I was expecting. The motor alone feels very stiff. Before we go diving into all these components, I just want to make sure this motor actually turns over, since that felt unusually stiff. I have my test controller set up off to the side with some test leads right here. I've got power in both of the leads. And now I'm going to stick one at the top of the motor, and we're going to stick one on the frame and just see what happens. So I don't know if you can hear that, but the motor is getting power, and it seems like even with nothing attached to it, that motor is pretty locked up. I guess what that means then is I've got to take the motor out of the frame completely, tear this thing down, and see if we can figure out what's seizing this up. I think the first order of business here is going to be removing both of these flywheels. There's a chance that these could be too close to the casing of the motor, and that could be causing some binding. So once we get those removed, we can see if that is what's causing our issue. And just from doing that, that might have been it. You might have been able to see that as I pried this flywheel away from the casing a little bit, the motor completely freed up. So now I'm going to see with my test leads once again if this thing will actually start. We'll have the red one attached right up here, and I'll put the black one at the bottom. And there we go. That's what was jamming up the motor, but we've still got to deal with the worm gears and all that, because those for sure are not going to help. While we already have the motor out of the model, I'm going to give it a good cleaning and servicing. Before the motor goes back into the locomotive, let's test it out one more time just for good measure. And to me, that seems very healthy. One final thing before we get into the trucks, I do want to clean off these little contacts. This is where power transfers from this little post on the trucks into the frame, into the bottom of the motor. So I want to get this cleaned up and make sure we got some good connectivity through there. Now it's finally time to move on to the trucks. I will start with this worm gear since both of these are the worst part of both trucks. We'll spend a lot of time on this. Then we'll go in, tear down this truck, clean up this worm gear cover, give all this some fresh oil, and put it all back into the locomotive. I don't think I mentioned it before I started cleaning out that worm gear, but if anyone was wondering, I'm again using some rubbing alcohol, and I'm going to use some Labelle 107, 102 just as regular oils, and I'm going to use some 106 as grease on the worm gears. All the parts of the first truck have been cleaned very thoroughly. Now it's time to give everything a little bit of fresh oil, put all this back together, and put it back into the chassis of the locomotive. The first truck has been completed, and now it's time to do the exact same thing once more. Now that all of our components, the trucks and the motor have been cleaned out, it's time to address the wiring. I'm going to be using these two little pieces of wire right here that I've cut. These were scraps that were just about the perfect size for this little project. And to wire everything up, I'm going to tin these two bars on the side right there. And we're also going to tin this top plate up here. To do that, I'm going to remove it from the motor. And then to wire everything up with this top bar and these two wires, I'm going to set it up in my helping hands jig. Then once that's done, we'll reattach this plate to the top and just solder the two wires onto their matching posts. Now that wiring is complete, it's not the best looking, so if this does work, I'll probably go in and clean it up a little bit, but it's not the worst I've ever done, and it should be enough to get the model running. Now we've only got a couple of things left to do, the first of which is I want to remove this old coupling drawbar system and install some good old-fashioned horn hooks on this thing. Then we've got to put the weight into the locomotive, then after that we can throw on the shell and test out the model. Now it's time to reinstall the shell. Here it is all cleaned up. It still might be a little bit damp, but it is mostly dried off in the time I've been working on this model. I also took a break earlier in the video and used some canopy glue to attach the horns back onto the shell of the locomotive. It seems to work really well, and while it does need a little bit more time to dry, it should be good enough for me to handle and to test out the locomotive. And now that this unit is put back together, let's test it out and hopefully it'll start. Now it's time to set the Super F7 up once more. And now that it's on the track, I've got my controller turned on. I'll give this thing some power and we will see what happens. And clearly that sprang straight to life. Let's flip the direction and see if anything is different in reverse. It might be just a smidge louder in reverse. I'll flip the direction once again and we'll let it do another complete lap or two. while it's not perfect, I am really happy with the way this F7 turned out. I think this will be a great engine for me to use, and maybe in the future I'll throw some Katie's on the thing.